Howdy everyone, welcome to This Old Vegan. My name is Merlene Vassell, and in this video I'm going to talk about how I managed to write the first two novels in the trilogy, The Vampire and the Vegan, with the third book to come, hopefully early next year. As I mentioned in a previous video, I really loved to read fiction as a child, and at some point I decided that I wanted to write fiction, but I didn't know where to start and how to do it. So I let that fall by the wayside for actually a very long time. However, my career has been in writing grant proposals and other business type writing for nonprofit organizations. However, at some point I got the idea for writing a vampire novel, and that gave me an incentive to look into writing fiction once again. This was sort of the opposite of what happened to me as a child, where I wanted to write but I didn't have anything to write about. But now I had something that I really wanted to write about, so I needed to figure out how exactly to turn the ideas that I had into a novel. So for that reason, I ended up purchasing several books about how to write a novel, read them voraciously, and then I was on my way. The books that I read about novel writing focused on such items as how to develop the chapter, how to develop characters, and how to make sure the characters grew throughout the course of the novel, how to incorporate suspense, the importance of conflict, what was the theme of the novel going to be, and on and on. And for me, breaking out the components of a good novel was critical because I'm a logical thinker, and that made it much easier for me to comprehend what it was that I needed to include in my novel. The next thing that happened, or perhaps all of this was happening at the same time, was I kept thinking about the story that I wanted to write, the details of it. So as I would be doing housework or gardening or exercising, whatever I might be doing, or talking to friends, as ideas would come up, I would jot them down on whatever was handy. And I just had the ideas percolating in my brain. It was literally 5 years before I began writing the draft of the first novel. However, even though I hadn't actually started writing out the novel, and by that I mean the narrative that you would actually read, what I did do was type up the notes that I had written on various scraps of paper here and there. I typed them into the computer, and as they grew, I started organizing them into different sections. For instance, I had a section on what the plot was going to be, a section describing the different characters, how old they were, what they looked like, what their personalities were like, what their biographies or their backstories were. Even if all of that wasn't going to go into the novel itself, I needed to have a firm grip on that in order to write the story. Other sections that I included in my notes were the environment, what the different houses and so forth looked like, what the rooms looked like, what themes I wanted to include. For me, the vampire story was, even though the novels are about vampires, ostensibly, they're actually about veganism. And so there are various themes within veganism, within ethical veganism, that I wanted to include in the novel. So I had those listed out so I could make sure that I included them, and also so I could make sure that they were sprinkled throughout and not all in one clump, because I felt that would possibly turn off some of the readers. In addition, I also had some bits of scenes or dialogue, other types of narrative that, every once in a while I would just get some kind of inspiration and sit down and write, oh, this is what they should say in this particular scene, even though I hadn't written the chapter yet. So what I would do is capture that language in my notes so that I could go back to it later on and stick it into the novel where it belonged. The next major step for me was taking the ideas that I had developed in the notes document and creating a new document that was I'll call it the outline for the novel, but in reality, what I used was a chart. As I mentioned, I'm a logical thinker, so it made it easier for me to organize what was happening when throughout the novel. So what I did was I created this very long chart where each column was a different chapter and each row contained different elements of each chapter. So for instance, the first row was what was the main plot. The second row would be what's one of the subplots that are going on. Then I had a row for each of the main characters, so I would know what each of the main characters was doing in each chapter. But also, as I followed along from chapter to chapter, I could see how each character was developing and changing for better or for worse. And this helped to allow me to make whatever changes characters were going to go through gradual, because I think it's very off-putting when you have a character that just suddenly goes from one extreme to the other. Having a row with what each character was doing in each chapter made it easy to keep track of when and how changes were being made in the character so that it would be gradual and more realistic. In addition to those rows, I also had a row for conflict. What is the main conflict in each chapter? What can I put in that would make it suspenseful? I tried to end most chapters with a bit of a cliffhanger to encourage the reader to want to move on to the next chapter. And I also tried to put surprises, not necessarily in every single chapter, but in many chapters so that the book would continue to be interesting. So anyway, thank you once again for watching my video. Please leave your thoughts and questions in the comments, and in particular, are you working on a novel or thinking about writing a novel? If so, what's it about and at what stage are you? Thanks again, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Take care.